You wake up because somebody's foot is in your ribs. It's dark, it's warm, and the cave smells like smoke, wet stone, and 11 other people, which is one of the more polite ways to describe a Neanderthal morning. And that's whose body you're in today. A hillside above the Atlantic, 20 miles south of where Lisbon is eventually going to turn up, roughly 90,000 years ago. Before you stand up, before you stretch, before you do anything about the foot, you crouch over a pile of ash and check the fire, which is the ancient equivalent of checking whether the Wi-Fi is down, and it carries about the same emotional weight, except the stakes are your entire day. Warmth isn't the issue. It's summer, and you're basically at the beach. The issue is that if those embers died overnight, everything that happens next gets harder, and not in a direction you're going to enjoy. Before we go any further, you should know what this body costs to run, because it explains almost everything else you're about to do. People who model this stuff put your daily burn somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 calories. The bottom of that is a big guy training hard. The top of it is a Tour de France stage. So you're going to eat like a professional endurance athlete today, and tomorrow, and every day until you die. And you do not have a refrigerator, a market, a farm, or a single domesticated plant or animal anywhere on the planet. Nobody has invented agriculture. Nobody has invented dogs. Your entire species, spread across Europe and Western Asia, is a few tens of thousands of people at best. Which means the sunrise is lovely, and you will not be looking at it. You're going to spend your morning doing math about fat. But first, back to those coals, because that crouch is not a small thing. Whether Neanderthals could start a fire from scratch is still a live argument. At a couple of well-dug cave sites in southwest France, the fire evidence does something backwards. It thins out during the coldest centuries, exactly when you'd expect people to want fire most. The archaeologist Dennis Sandgaithe and his team have an uncomfortable explanation for that. Some groups may not have been making fire at all. They were picking it up off the landscape. Warm centuries bring lightning. Lightning brings wildfires, and a wildfire is free ignition lying around for anyone willing to walk over with a branch. Cold centuries bring none of that. Other researchers push back, and they've got a good card to play. At another French site, Neanderthals were stockpiling a black mineral that makes wood catch at a lower temperature. Nobody hauls that home for the color. That's fire-starting powder. Both things can be true, in different valleys, in different centuries, which is the least satisfying possible answer, and probably the correct one. What matters on your hillside is that you treat those embers like they're irreplaceable, because for you, they might be. Breakfast is where the real ingenuity shows up, and it starts with a limit your own body sets. Your liver can only handle so much protein in a day, nowhere near enough to cover what you burn. Go past the line, and you don't get stronger. You get poisoned. The syndrome has the almost insultingly gentle name of rabbit starvation, and it kills people who eat nothing but lean meat. So a mountain of steak doesn't save you. What you're actually hunting is the fat inside the animal, and they solved that at a scale nobody expected. At a lakeside site in Germany, archaeologists found the smashed up bones of more than 170 large animals, cracked apart and cooked down for the grease inside them. A dedicated fat factory, running 100,000 years before anybody else was doing anything like it. So, breakfast is bone grease, mixed with whatever plants are around. And we know about the plants because their teeth told on them. The hardened plaque on Neanderthal molars from a cave in northern Spain came back with pine nuts, moss, and mushrooms. You are eating bone broth with mushrooms and pine nuts. Your ancestors were doing brunch, and they were doing it without a single word of French. While you eat, take stock of the body you woke up in, because it's not the one you have now. You're short, around 5'4", and that's the least interesting thing about you. Your rib cage flares out like a barrel. Your forearms are thick, and your grip is frightening. Researchers reaching for a modern comparison keep landing on rugby players, which tells you what kind of body plan this is. Not a runner. A collider. All that muscle is doing two jobs at once. Keeping you warm and powering a hunting style where the plan is to physically arrive at the animal. That machine runs hot whether or not you find anything to put in it, which is why the fat matters, which is why your morning looks like this. By late morning, you're out of the cave and moving, and this is the part everybody thinks they already know. You walk more in a day than you have walked in the last month, over ground with no paths on it, in a group that reads the landscape the way you read a train timetable, which slope holds deer at this hour, which gully the hyenas use, where the water is. Your weapons are heavy wooden spears with stone points, built for driving into an animal rather than throwing across a field. So you close the distance. On an aurochs, a wild cow the size of a small car, with a temperament to match, you close it to arm's length, and then you hold on. There's no romance in the next 30 seconds. It's 4 or 5 of you, close enough to feel the animal's breath. Everybody committed. Everybody trusting that nobody else lets go early. Then it's over, and you're standing in a field with several hundred kilos of food and a very long walk home. The point on the end of that spear is yours too, and it's harder to make than it looks. Your method runs backwards from how anybody would guess. Instead of chipping at a rock until a blade appears, you shape the whole stone first, so that one last precise tap pops off a flake that is already the finished tool. Thin, sharp, the right outline. Done. Flint knappers who do this today describe learning it as brutal. You have to hold the finished object in your head and work toward it through a material that shatters if you're wrong. It's carpentry, except the wood explodes. And the kids in your group have been watching adults do it since before they could walk. Your skeleton keeps the receipts. The anthropologist Eric Trinkaus and a colleague once mapped the injuries across 17 Neanderthal skeletons, and the damage sat in a strange place. Heads, necks, shoulders, arms, and almost nothing below the waist. They went looking for a modern group that breaks the same bones in the same places, and found exactly one. Professional rodeo riders. The paper notes, deadpan, that this isn't meant to suggest Neanderthals would have qualified for the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. Trinkaus later walked the comparison back, so hold it loosely. What nobody argues about is the wear itself. Whatever you're doing out there is happening at contact range, and your body is taking the damage on a schedule. Now, here's the part the diorama never got around to painting, and it's the reason your day is set on this particular hillside. You don't spend the afternoon on the plains. You go down to the water. The cave you woke up in is a real place. It's called Figueira Brava. It sits on the coast south of Lisbon, and when Juan Zileon's team dug into it, what came up was a shell midden, an enormous garbage heap of seafood, limpets and mussels, crabs, sharks and eels, seabirds, dolphins, seals. Roughly half the food at that site came out of the ocean, close to 100,000 years ago, which is tens of thousands of years earlier than anybody thought Europeans were doing anything of the kind. They were picky about it too. The crab shells in that pile are adults, about 6 inches across, proper dinner crabs, and they went onto the coals whole. The little ones got left in the rocks, so your afternoon is a tide pool. You're waist deep in cold Atlantic water, working a stone flake under the edge of a limpet before it clamps down, feeling along the rock with your feet because you can't see through the surge. Somebody further out is turning boulders over looking for crabs. And nobody is doing this because the hunting went badly that week. It's about half of what keeps you alive. You even carry the proof in your skull. Trinkaus and his colleagues went through the ear canals of 77 ancient skulls, and about half of the Neanderthals had bone growing inside them, little knuckles of it, narrowing the tunnel. Doctors see that constantly today, in one very specific set of patients, people who spend years with cold water and cold wind in their ears. Everyone calls it surfer's ear, twice the rate of any other group in that study. Other things can nudge those growths along, and the argument isn't settled, but the boring explanation keeps winning. Neanderthals had the ears of surfers because Neanderthals were in the water. Sit with that for a second. The shaggy tundra brute of the museum diorama, the one clinging to a mammoth in every illustration you saw as a kid, is also a guy with an ear condition named after a beach sport. The afternoon goes quieter after that, and your hands get interesting. Back at the shelter, somebody is making string. Actual string. In a rock shelter in southeastern France, the paleoanthropologist Bruce Hardy spotted a white fleck on a stone flake and put it under a microscope, and it turned out to be a piece of cord. 3 bundles of plant fiber twisted one way, then wound together the other way, which is the exact trick that stops a rope coming apart in your hands. The whole fragment is the length of a grain of rice. It's also the oldest string on Earth, which is a strange thing to be able to say about a crumb. The making of it is the good part, though. Those fibers come from the inner bark of a pine, and that layer only peels cleanly in spring and early summer, while the tree is growing. So somebody was keeping a harvest calendar in their head, months ahead of the day they'd need rope. Once you can do that, you can make bags, nets, snares, mats, and clothing that actually stays on. Everything you own with a strap on it descends from an afternoon like this one. Some of what gets made in an afternoon isn't for survival at all. At a Croatian site called Krapina, researchers pulled a box of white-tailed eagle talons out of a museum drawer, more than a century after they'd been dug up, and found cut marks on them. And polish, the shine claws pick up from rubbing against each other on a string. So somebody went after eagles, took the talons, and wore them where other people could see. That is not a tool. That's an outfit. You're using your teeth as a tool as well, constantly. The Neanderthals of El Cidrón left their front teeth chipped and scarred in a pattern you only get from gripping material in your mouth while both hands work on it. A third hand, basically. The wear is so specific, it even tells you who was right-handed and who wasn't. Every time you hold a screw between your lips while you line up a shelf bracket, you are running very old software. I want to tell you about a boy from that Spanish cave, because his mouth was holding something else. He had an abscess in his jaw. Anyone who's had one knows that's a pain that shuts your whole life down. And a gut parasite on top of it. When Laura Weirika's team read the DNA locked in his dental plaque, 2 things came out. Poplar, which is the tree aspirin comes from, and traces of the mold that gave us penicillin. A sick teenager was chewing painkiller bark and moldy plant matter. He couldn't have known why it worked. He knew that it worked. And somebody had told him, and somebody had told them. The light goes. And when the light goes in your world, you go inside. Because the same coast that gave you crab is also home to hyenas that would happily reverse the arrangement. Everyone comes back to the fire, the one you were so careful about at dawn. And it turns out you were right to be careful, because now it's the only reason the dark stays outside. Salt on your hands. A cut on your forearm you don't remember getting. Somebody's kid asleep against somebody else's leg. This is the part of the day nobody put in the museum diorama. 12 people, close together, fed, tired, with nothing to do, and nowhere to be for the next 10 hours. There is no evidence of what they said to each other. There's no way there was silence. And there's one stubborn clue about the equipment. A Neanderthal buried in a cave in Israel kept his hyoid, the little horseshoe bone in your throat that anchors the muscles you speak with. And it's essentially the same as yours. On its own, a bone proves nothing about language, and nobody serious says otherwise. But these are people who hunted as a coordinated group, kept a bark harvest in their heads months ahead, and taught their kids a stone technique that takes years to learn. Try running all that on grunting. Outside, the dark is doing what dark did for 300,000 years. Which is contain things with better night vision than you. And somewhere in a circle like that one, not yours, a long way east and thousands of years later, in a cave in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq, sits the person this whole day has been building toward. His skeleton is catalogued as Shanidar 1, though the researchers who dug him up nicknamed him Nandy. He'd taken a crushing blow to the left side of his face that probably cost him the sight in that eye. His right arm ended above the wrist, withered and gone. He walked badly, and in his ear canals, the same bone growths that come from the tide pools, so far along on one side that the tunnel had closed over completely. He was almost certainly deaf. 1 eye, 1 arm, a limp, no hearing. He was somewhere around 40 when he died, which for a Neanderthal is old, and he had carried those injuries for years. There is exactly one way a man like that eats every day for years. Somebody brought it to him. That's the whole day. You'll do it again tomorrow, And so will everyone in that cave, 900 centuries ago, in a place with no writing, no cities, no wheel, no maps, and no name for anything. And the piece of it that's still in your building isn't the spear or the crab. Think about the last time somebody in your house was sick, properly sick, the kind where they don't come to the table, and you carried a plate into another room and set it down next to them. You didn't decide anything. Nobody thanked you for a heroic act. You just noticed that a person you know couldn't come get food, and food is over here, and their room is over there, and your feet did the rest. That was the machinery. That exact one. Not a metaphor for it, not a descendant of it. The same behavior, running unchanged, in a body 90,000 years newer. Nandy's group ran the same errand, with an armful of meat in a cave in the Zagros. The spear and the fire and the tide tables they figured out. The thing that kept them going for 300,000 years is the thing you did last Tuesday without noticing. So when you picture them, don't picture the diorama. Picture somebody who noticed. One question before you go, and I want a real answer in the comments. I don't mean, would you survive that day? Anyone can guess at that. Which part of that day do you think you'd actually be good at?